So now we're going to move on and look at another way to animate our Lottie Lottie animations on the page. And for this final one, we're going to use interactions to run Lottie animation when the user clicks a button. So in this case, I've downloaded a heart animation that I want to run when someone clicks a like button on a blog post. So in order to do this, first I need to set up a section on my blog posts to house the Lottie animation and the like button. So I'm just going to do that really quickly. Okay, so now I have my rows set up at the end of each of my little blog cards. One column that's half the width for the animation, one column that's half the width for the like button, styled the like button, added some height constraints as well as some flex items to center and to center both horizontally and vertically both the animation and the like button. So now the problem that we have is that up to now we have we've loaded in all of our animation to elements, to divs on the page with unique IDs. And here basically we want to load the same animation into 3 different divs. And so rather than use a unique ID, in this case I'm going to use an attribute. So you could use a class, but I like to keep my classes for styling and my IDs for some types of targeting, and for the rest of the targeting using attributes. And we can use custom attributes that typically are prefixed by data. So data dash something. And then you set that value to whatever you want. So in order to do that, I'm just going to make sure that my div that I want to add the animation to is selected. So I can either page view or in the DOM tree, select that, go over to our attribute editor. And in this case, instead of adding in an ID, I'm going to go down to add attribute. And the name of the attribute is going to be data-interaction. So next we have to go ahead and give that a value. In this case, I'm going to give it a value of heart. And so now what I can do is I can use my Lottie script to target any of the elements on the page that have this particular attribute. And so I'm just going to go ahead and add that to the rest of them. Okay, so now I have that attribute added to all 3 of my areas where I'm going to want the animation to appear. So this time we're going to have to put in a slightly different script than what we had done before. And so basically I can still copy that script we already have on the page and then just go ahead and modify it. So go over to the page. Let's go ahead and Option click just to close up all those segments. Let's go to our last script there that we had. Go ahead and duplicate it and then go to our code panel to begin modifying it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is this time instead of defining the container within the load animation data parameters, I'm going to define that container outside. So I'm just going to define a variable. So what this line does is it creates a variable using let of heart animation. Then it sets that equal to all of the elements on the page using query selector all. So all the elements within the document that have an attribute, and you define attributes by surrounding them with square brackets, of data-interaction that's equal to the value heart. And we could simplify this by saying just any of them that have the empty attribute data interaction, not supply a value. But as you'll see, I'm going to go ahead and use another attribute to target my buttons. So that's important. Okay, so now we've got the elements on the page selected. So next what we have to do, and what this is going to do, is it's going to return to us an array of all the objects on the page, all the elements on the page with this that meet this criteria. So we have to now step through each of those elements. So we're just going to hit a return here. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to take the variable heart animation, which is that passed back array of elements, and it's going to say for each element within the array, run the following function. And so this is just arrow syntax for saying to take for each element within this, do the following. And so again, just like we had before, we're going to have a script that's going to load that in. And so in this case, I defined my container outside of this script. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And instead of saying container and passing in some JavaScript, I'm going to say element, which is going to take this element here, which is one of the elements in the array, and pass it in as the container. We're keeping the renderer the same. We're still looping. We're setting autoplay to false. And then in this case, we're loading in our heart animation. And that closes out the Lottie load animation. We have to make sure that our for each loop is closed out. And so we need a closing bracket for here, and then a closing parentheses for there. Okay, so that's our new script. And again, that's going to pick all of them with this attribute and then load in the same animation. Refresh the page, wait for it to load in, scroll down, and we can see now we have this heart that's appearing here next to the like button. Now with our animations loaded in, we need to add interactions to our buttons so that when they're clicked, they cause the animation to play. We're going to use a similar technique to how we loaded the animation in by giving each of the buttons a custom attribute so that we can easily target them in the interaction. So in order to do this, we'll go ahead and select that first like button. We'll go to the properties panel, and then we'll click on add attribute. Remember, with custom attributes, you prefix them with data dash. And then since we're using it in an interaction, we'll give it the attribute interaction. So now we can give it a value, and in this case, since it's the like button, we'll give it a value of like. So now we can do this with each of the other buttons. Okay, so now we have all of our attributes added. Let's go back to the first button and now add an interaction. Go up to the interactions panel. In this case, it's a straight interaction, so click on the top interactions action. That'll bring in or open our new interactions panel if we want to. Again, we can give it a name. Don't have to. And then for a trigger, we're going to say when we click on the button. Next, we have to set a target. So in this case, Pinegrow is sort of like a little over efficient when we select the target on the page. So if we click on target, click select on page, and then pick, move that, click on the container, and then we take a look at what that actual target is by editing the selector. We can see that it's really long, and the problem with it is that it's going to go to the body, and then it's going to select just this card, and then work its way down to select just this animation. So if we were to use this in an apply to many, rather than playing the animation that is next to the button, it would play this animation. And so what we have to do is we have to edit this down a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that first section of it. So what we're going to want is, if we look back at the structure, this whole card is kept with, this set of animation and like button is kept within a row. So what we want to do is go up from the like button to the parental row. And to do that, we'll use a caret. So now we're saying go up to the first parent of this like button that has a class dot of row. And then we want to go down and select the very first div that is a child of that row. And in order to do that, we put in a pipe. So now that's going to go to the first div, which happens to be this particular column. Rather than nth of type, we could give it a different name or a different designator, but this is going to work just fine. So we hit OK. So now we're targeting our column, and now we have to add in our animation. So we click on Edit Animation. That will bring up a new timeline. So now within that timeline, when we go down here, we go ahead and click on the empty space. That's going to add in a new transition. And then for that transition, we're going to leave the type as tween, position set to 0, and then we will set, in this case, a duration, because this will actually govern how long the animation play activity occurs. This is going to depend on what your animation is. Could be shorter, could be longer. For right now, I'm just going to pick 1.5 seconds. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a property to that of Lottie and Lottie play. So we don't actually have to fill in this bottom Lottie play section. It'll automatically play for the 1.5 seconds. So now if we go ahead and enable clicks, or hold down Alt and click our like, we can see that it plays the animation. But the thing is, if you notice, so now the animation has reached the end of that 1.5 duration, but it's still playing. And so in order to stop the animation, what we have to do now is go ahead and right at the end add another one. In this case, we're going to change the type to set. We're going to make sure that it's at the end there, 1.5. Then we're going to add a property of Lottie and pause. So now we can see that, again, if we have clicks enabled or hold down the hotkey to be able to click, when we click that button, it'll play, and then when it gets done, when it gets through to the end, when it hits that pause, the animation will stop. So one thing that you can see here is that this looks a little bit weird in that the animation is kind of paused in the middle of a frame. And so what we can do is we can go back to the advanced options, and we can say reset on end. And what that's going to do is it's just going to make sure that the animation goes back to the very beginning once it's been paused. All right, so now we've got the animation set on this like button. The next thing that we have to do is make sure that it's set on the other two like buttons. And again, we're going to use an apply to many. So if we go back to our interactions, scroll down, click on apply to many, we now have to select a target. And remember, we just added those data attributes. So we're going to go ahead and click on that, say edit selector, and we're going to select it off of the page. So we're going to add a $sign so it knows we're selecting something off the page. And then again, a bracket to say we're doing an attribute. Enter our attribute, and then is equal to a value of like, which is how we designated our buttons. So now we'll click on OK, and we can see that now the target is going to light up all 3 of those buttons. So if we go ahead and click on, actually we have to do a refresh first, but then if we go ahead and click on this button, it causes that animation to run. If we click on this button, it causes this animation to run. So one thing that I did notice is that the animations are not resetting back, and that's because I actually forgot to put in a time for the pause. So if you put in 0 for that pause, that will then cause the animation to reset. And basically that is it for this tutorial. I've shown you how you can easily bring Lottie animation into a standard Pinegrow page, how you can cause it to play when the user loads in the page. And then I've shown you now in this current video how you can add interactions that allow you to customize how that video plays, how that animation plays, based on user action, either clicking a button, scrolling over with the mouse, or scrolling the page with the animation into view. So on the final page, you'll see that I have another interaction. It's a Lottie animation that appears and starts playing above the contact form. I'll leave it up to you to add your own animation in with what you've learned through these tutorials. Hopefully these tutorials will help you start using Lottie animations when building pages with Pinegrow. While they take a little more effort than a GIF or a ping, they consume much less bandwidth, and combined with Pinegrow Interactions, they can really grab the user's attention. So feel free to reach out in our forum. Feel free to reach out to support if you have any additional questions. And until the next tutorial, have fun designing with Pinegrow.